So welcome everyone to the second lecture to our symposium, Storytelling, Myth-Making, and the Shaping of Universal History. Quan will be presenting today. Well, Dr. Quan Le will be presenting on Chinese classics, particularly on the Three Kingdoms story. And the theme for the symposium, as Matt, I'm sure, has already explained in previous details, the reason why we chose this is because storytelling is really central to what shapes our identity and our meaning and where we are placed in time. And by studying storytelling, which really is something that has always been the predominant shaper of people's understanding, for better or worse, of why, what the political situation is and so forth, it's very important that we have a certain working understanding of what have been major stories in the past that have shaped thoughts that still affect our time today. And also another important thing is that as we study these stories more, we realize that there's actually a lot of commonality in the themes, and that the struggle with the best artists, the best stories that have lasted for centuries, have always focused on the struggle between freedom and slavery, between tyranny and a form of governance that is competent and can lead effectively, but also treats the individual citizen as something that can partake in that, and that is a true free citizen. Yeah, it automatically shut off. I don't know what happened. By taking it from this standpoint, we also have a better understanding of how stories today are being misused or being manipulated. Today, we don't really have so much artists from the past, like Shakespeare, for instance, and what he did for our understanding of Roman history, certain tragic outcomes that led to something that has shaped the Western world to this day. He did a better job at explaining the core fundamentals of that than Gibbons did in like his 900-page historical account of Rome. So today we don't have that kind of artistry. We have more a controlled fabrication of this through things like Netflix and Hollywood. And that's very dangerous, because this is ultimately what is going to be shaping people's understanding of what their identity is, what their meaning is from this point on. And it effectively is erasing what is centuries of good storytelling that is meant to remind people every generation what has been this ongoing struggle between freedom and tyranny. So I think with that, Quan, you can go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia, and thank you everyone to be present today. So I think that the simplest is to begin by the title, Classics and Classics, the Three Kingdoms, Tempus and Chronos. So the first classics is about the standard 5 classics of Chinese culture, plus what is called the 4 books. The 4 books also have an equivalent in terms of classical novels, which are called the 4 marvelous books in Chinese, Sita Mingshu. And among those 4 marvelous books, we have the Three Kingdoms. I just want to take 1 minute to remind the 5 standard classics, the I Ching, the book of change, but I would call it the root book of Chinese civilization. You have the Shu Qing, the book of songs of poetry, You have Chun Chu, which means spring and autumn, which is a history and philosophy book by Confucius. You have the Shu Jing, which is a collection of old documents, philosophy and history and epistemology, the time of the first Zhou kings in the 11th century BCE to the time of Confucius. And you have the Zhou Li, which is the book of rituals from the same Zhou royal house. And the four standard classical books are, of course, the Lun Yu, the Analects of Confucius, the Mencius, Ta Sui, meaning the great learning, which is the main Confucian epistemological book, a small book, but a very important book, and Zhongyong, meaning the doctrine of the mean, extolling one of the four major virtues, moderation, or maybe better called humanity. And the equivalent in terms of classical novels are the famous Four Marvelous Books. And one of those four are the Three Kingdoms. I will not talk about the other three, maybe one day, but for now, I will focus on the Three Kingdoms. Maybe before going into the details of the Three Kingdoms, I would like to remind that classics are books or works that will bring us to the divine dimension of truth, goodness, and beauty. It can be done with traditional terminology like in the five, six, or the four classical books of the Confucian schools, or it can be done in a more entertaining manner by novels, by poetry, by plays. And when those plays, novels, poetry uplift us to truth, goodness, and beauty, well, they are awarded the title of classical novels or classical poetry or classical plays, like in the case of Shakespeare, as Cynthia mentioned. So the words, the Three Kingdoms, represent many things. It can represent cartoons for children. It can represent anime, manga. It can represent historical drama, very long historical drama, as a Chinese TV series, movies like Redcliffe by John Woo, for known, maybe better known for North American public than the novel by itself. But it represents first and foremost for the Chinese classical education, a history book, okay, written by a guy named Cheng Shao. Cheng is his family name, Chen. Shao, Shou, is his given name. He lived in the 3rd century. He was born in 233 and he died in 297. And he wrote a history and philosophy book about 360,000 Chinese characters. To give you guys an idea, 265,000 Chinese characters represent about 500 pages of English text translation in small characters. So that history and philosophy book is about 600, 650 pages if it were published in English in small characters. And that book is very important because it's considered one of the 24 standard historical work in China, because you have 24 standards classical history books about all the dynasty who ruled China since 231 BCE, and the records of the Three Kingdoms by Cheng Shao is one of those 24 standard histories. And that book is very important for the romance of the Three Kingdoms, which is the classical novel written in the 14th century by a guy named Luo Guanzhong. Luo is his family name, Luo. His given name is Bun, B-E-N, but the B in Pinyin is pronounced like a P. But in ancient China, we have what we call a courtesy name. Okay, he's better known by his courtesy name than his given name. So his courtesy name is Guanzhong, Guanzhong. And the G, once again, is pronounced like a K in Pinyin, inside the Pinyin system. Not many things are known about Luo Guanzhong, but I think that what is important is not the details of his personal life, but the immortal word he gave us 6 centuries ago. I want to give some publishing details since it's an important work. Why it's an important work? Because not many Chinese know in the details the 5 standard classics, even under the Chinese Empire. But I would say that many classical values have been transmitted thanks to the classical novels, the 4 marvelous books, and what probably I think that we can say the most important of those 4 marvelous books is the Three Kingdoms. The first, well, since Luo Guanzhong probably died in the year 1400, of course that during his lifetime, written manuscripts were circulated in separate chapters and propagated by his friends, of course. But the first printed version is from 1522. So it's more than a century after his death. And in that printed version of 1522, we have a preface by Luo Guanzhong dated 1494. Of course, he already died in 1494. So probably it's from an old manuscript that has been copied and included in the printed version of 1522. Between 1522 and 1690, there have been many printed versions because there were many publishing houses, especially in the southern part of China, which under the Ming Dynasty was the most prosperous one. Okay, it's still the most prosperous one nowadays, what is called the eastern coast of China and the southern coast of China. But a guy named Mao Zedong, Mao Zedong doesn't have, I don't know if he was one of the ancestors of Mao Zedong, but anyway, they share the same surname. And Mao Zedong was born in 1632 and died in 1709. With his son were editors and publishers. And they gave us the definitive version of 1660. And that definitive version is about 800,000 words in, well, words, Chinese characters, in 120 chapters. And the final version is 1679. The TV version, which resembles the most that classical version of 120 chapters, has been produced in 2010 and is simply called The Three Kingdoms, and not in 120 episodes, but in 95 episodes, which is not bad. Now, I would like to talk about the historical work by Chao Shao, Records of the Three Kingdoms. I talk about the novel or the romance of the Three Kingdoms by Luo Guanzhong. And now, I would like to talk about the period, the historical period. Because as I will develop later on, there are almost 1,000 characters in that novel. Of course, and they are quite developed, each of them. However, there is a core of maybe 100 to 120 major characters. You all understand that I'm not going to talk about all those 120 characters, but I will talk about some of them, let's say 5 to 6. However, I want to say from the start that the major character of the three kingdoms is not a character in flesh. The major character of the three kingdoms is China, Chinese civilization. Because okay, the historical period of the three kingdoms is defined as from 220, or to be exact, November 24, 220, when the 400 years old Imperial Han Dynasty collapsed, and ended 60 years later in 280. That period of 2 generations was of vital importance for China, because if we accept to take the criterion of written documents as the start of history, Chinese history began in 1600 BCE, because 1600 BCE was the beginning of the Shang dynasty, and written documents have been found for that dynasty. So the three kingdoms started 18 centuries after the beginning of official history for China, and we are about 1800 years after the period of the three kingdoms. So speaking from the present day perspective, the three kingdoms period is exactly at the middle of Chinese history. And I would say that it's not only at the chronological middle of Chinese history, is at the center of Chinese history in terms of transmission of values, of transmission of classical values. And of course, the three main forms of classical values are truth, goodness, and beauty. And I would use the characters who are also historical characters to illustrate the upper trigram, which is a notion from the I Ching that I would take 2 minutes to explain again later on. I would like to, since we are speaking of criteria for what is called history or not history, I would like to come back to the famous expression that when people speak about Chinese culture or civilization, they wouldn't often speak about a 5,000 years period, okay? Once again, by strict definition of written documents, Chinese history is 36 centuries, not 50 centuries. But why many people speak about 5,000 years, and even Chinese official would speak about 5,000 years? It's because between 3000 BCE and 2000 BCE, there was a culture called Longshan, Long. Shan, and it's mean the mountain of the dragon. So the contour of the mountain of the dragon, or Longshan contour. And that Longshan contour gave many artistic representation or concept that, that have been transmitted to later dynasties, like the dragon, for example, or the phoenix, or the way to organize a house. That at the north we have the symbol of a tortoise. At the south we have a symbol of a red bird. At the west we have the symbol of a white tiger, and at the east we have the symbol of a green or blue dragon. Okay, all those fundamental control representation were already present in the Longshan culture. And of course, the first royal Chinese dynasty, starting in 2070 BCE to 1600 BCE, did not produce writing documents, or maybe one day we will find something, but for now, there are no written documents for the Xia dynasty. But for the Chinese people, the Xia dynasty is a reality, since we found archaeological evidence for the Xia dynasty in the Henan province, a province at the center of China. So that's why you hear the expression a history, or I prefer to say a continuous control matrix of 5,000 years, and to be strict with criteria, a 36th century history. The period of the three kingdoms, as I said, represent the collapse of the Han Dynasty. And the Han Dynasty is very important for the Chinese people because they call themselves according to that Han Dynasty, and they call themselves the Han people. And that those Han people is the ethnic majority in China, if you want. Depending of the books, it's written they represent 90%, 91%, 92%. Let's say around 90% of the Chinese population nowadays, and live mostly at the east of a line called the Heihe Tongcheng line. Heihe is a city in the province of Heilongjiang, at the northeast of China, and Tongcheng is a city at the southwest of China in Yunnan, if I remember well, and it's represent 4.6 million square kilometers, and 94% of the Chinese people live in that 4.6 million square kilometers. And the western part represents 5 million square kilometers, and 6% of the Chinese people live in that 5 million square kilometers. It resembles a little bit Russia, but in the reverse. Okay, most of the population of Russia is in her western part, and you have a little bit of the Russian population in her eastern part. So it's a little bit the same, but reverse. And I go back to the records of the three kingdoms by Chen Shao. Chen Shao literary style and vivid portrayal of characters have been a source of influence for the novel, a major influence. It contains 65 volumes of about 360,000 Chinese characters in 3 books. Since it's called the Three Kingdoms, well, it's because there are 3 kingdoms, of course. There are 30 books devoted to the kingdom of Wei, Wei, W-E-I. There are 15 books devoted to the kingdom of Shu, S-H-U, and there are 20 books devoted to the kingdom of Wu, W-U. Each volume is organized in the form of one or more biographies. Here, why biographies? Okay, because for Chinese mentality, history is a certain interpretation of the human adventure, and that adventure is made of the intentions, of the desires, the statements, the reactions, the actions, the projects of man, of all walks of life in a certain period of time. And for the Chinese, some men are more developed, and for the Westerner too, I think that we share this. After all, what is classical is universal and is eternal. So for all human beings, including the Chinese, some men are more developed epistemologically, or to speak with a religious language. Their soul are more advanced. And of course, the classical books will put to the forefront the intentions, the desire, the statement, the reaction, the actions, and the projects of those more developed men in terms of epistemology. Okay, I just want to admit someone. And I would like to take 5 minutes to remind the central concept of the I Ching, which is the first Confucian classic, and which is the hexagram. Okay, the hexagram is a concept formed by 6 lines, as the name says. Okay, hexa 6 and gram line or graphics. And there is what the Chinese call the upper trigram and the lower trigram. The lower trigram is named 1, 2, 3, and the upper trigram is named 4, 5, 6. And between those two trigrams, we have a space corresponding to the divided line of Plato. So the lower trigram is the animal kingdom, and the upper trigram is the divine kingdom. And it's a representation of the journey of the soul or of epistemological development. At the first line is called vitality or the senses perception. The second line is called the intellect, which is the wording and conceptual and imaging machine. And the third line is called the psyche. The psyche is defined as the beginner's soul or the inchoate soul. So the easy way to remember is the acronym VIP, okay? Because vitality, V for vitality, I for intellect, and P for psyche. And we have the dividing line or the space between the two trigrams. And the fourth line, which is the first line of the upper trigram, is precisely the soul. After that, we have our inner cosmos. The soul is when the lower meets the higher. And the fifth line is our inner cosmos, meaning the left meets the right. And the sixth line is the south. So for Chinese traditional mentality, it corresponds, if we live in a fair society, to increasing level of responsibilities. Okay, so at the first line, epistemologically, okay, Satomi ask what is the sixth line, the sixth line is the self. So in a perfectly fair society, um, each one will have the exact level of responsibility corresponding to his or her epistemological development. At the first line, it would be the people, okay, corresponding to sense perception, or Acacia 1, the shadows for Plato. At the second line, which is the intellect, or Acacia 2, or the shadows 2 for Plato, which correspond to the petty officers. At the level of the psyche, corresponding to Pistis for Plato, which will be the officer. The fourth line, the anoia, mathematical representation or true art, because at the fourth line, the anoia, you have two levels. First level, which is mathematical forms, and the second level of the anoia is true art. And true art can be a classical novel, of course. And that corresponds to the level of ministers and lords. The fifth line is dialecticon for Plato, playful exploration, the aristocratic man, and it corresponds to the sovereign. And the sixth line, the self, corresponded to theoria for Plato, contemplation, and it corresponds to the sage. So the adventure of Chinese civilization is the adventure to build a fair society where no one is oppressed and each one has to take his part of responsibilities according to his or her epistemological development. And I would say that all Chinese kids are more or less brainwashed with that idea, even if that kid or that teenager or that young man or young woman is not necessarily capable to state it in word. What is unconsciously and subconsciously understood by the brainwashing of the Chinese matrix is that you have to make yourself worthy by advancing in your epistemological journey, even if that person will not necessarily state it with those words. And even nowadays, the Chinese meritocracy, which is a legacy from the past, is exactly according to that model, even if the Chinese Communist Party or the Communist Party of China, to use the right order, would not use the hexagram, of course, in their official documents, but their official document and their meritocratic mentality is a direct reflection of the hexagram and of the lower trigram and the upper trigram from the I Ching. And the I Ching has been written 3,000 years ago by the first king of the Zhou dynasty, Zhou Wen, W-E-N, and Zhou Wen, the king Wen of Zhou dynasty was born in 11 and 12 BCE, and he began to rule not as king, but as a feudal lord under the Shang dynasty at 13 years old. Like the first emperors, it's a coincidence, but both began their rule at 13 years old. And for King Wen, it was in the 1099. And in the 1056 BCE, he proclaimed himself king because his people thought that the mandate of heaven has been granted to him, first and foremost because of his virtuous conduct the last 30 years, and also in a second 1059 BCE, there was an astronomical phenomenon on the northwestern sky of China, with the conjunction of Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn for many weeks. So combined with the fact that he was a good ruler for the last 30 years, his people decided to interpret that astronomical phenomenon as a sign of heaven, granting him the mandate of heaven. And since we are speaking of the mandate of heaven, there are four things that we need to understood by the mandate of heaven. The mandate of heaven is granted because of a virtuous man at the head of a group of virtuous men. And a virtuous man is a man having his three layers of energy. The first layers is the personality. The second layer is the individuality. And the third layer is the universal self. The personality comes from our own personal history. The individuality comes from our personal decision to go on the epistemological journey or the journey of the soul. And the universal self is precisely to be in dialecticon and playful exploration, having a sovereign mind, capable to see many possibilities in one situation, and finally the contemplation of the form according to Plato, or the self if you want. And so mandate of heaven is granted to a virtuous man surrounded by a group of virtuous men. The mandate of heaven is only for one group of person at a given place, and the mandate of heaven can be lost. Okay, meaning that the mandate of heaven is not granted forever. The virtue has to be maintained, and practical results have to be present for the people. And those practical results can be summarized by three things: order and peace, food, and by food it includes transportation, clothing, housing, of course, and education. Okay, so it can be, I would say, legitimacy by performance, because the virtue is not only something abstract, but it's also something that we can see because of practical results. And here, I think that nothing would be better to illustrate that than to read the 6 or 7 paragraph of the Longchong plan, okay? Because I spoke about many philosophical things, and I want also to go into the flesh of the novel of Three Kingdoms. And that flesh is something that will transmit the value of truth, goodness, and beauty. And in the 120 chapters of the Three Kingdoms, we have a group of chapters that are very important, because that group of 14 chapters, from the end of chapter 37 to the end of chapter 50, wow, those 14 chapters are devoted to 1 year, and that year is 208. Why that year is important? Because during that year, one of the king, okay, he did not proclaim himself king or emperor, but I wouldn't say king to simplify, okay, the leader of the future Wei kingdom, which is the biggest kingdom, called Cao Cao, C-A-O, C-A-O. Of course, it's two different Chinese characters pronounced differently, but in English, it's give the same written form, C-A-O, C-A-O, Cao Cao. Born in 155 and died in 220, in March 220. That year, 208, Cao Cao lost the famous Battle of Red Cliff, okay, the battle that has been put in cinema by John Woo under the name of Red Cliff precisely. And that year, Cao Cao, who was destined to unify China, had to relinquish his ambition because after his defeat at Red Cliff, after many adventures and episodes, the three kingdoms would form 12 years later in 220. And I would say that you have that group of chapter from chapter 37 to 50, and from chapter 50 to chapter 80, those chapters would cover the period from year 208 and 220 precisely. I remind all of you that on November 24, 220, the 400 years old Han Dynasty ended. And from chapter 80 to chapter 120, we have the towering figure of Zhuge Liang. Zhuge is his family name, Z-H-U-G-E. Liang, his given name, L-I-A-N-G, and Zhuge Liang was born in 181 and he died in 234. And Zhuge Liang was the name, his courtesy name was Kong Ming, and Kong Ming means understanding Confucius, okay, because Kong is the family name of Confucius, and Ming means clarity or understanding of. So Kong Ming, his courtesy names mean the person who understands Confucius. And he's a major role model for Chinese scholars and for Chinese children and teenager and young men, young women. And his art name is Wolong, and Wolong means couch dragon. Okay, what do I mean by couch dragon? In English, all of us know the expression couch potato. So couch dragon, wow, it's like couch potato, but potato is replaced by dragon. So Zhuge Liang is a historical character, of course, born in 181 and died in 234, but he's also the archetypical scholar, uh, having the devotion to the state, but at the same time, an artist, a musician, a poet. So he was one of the rare Chinese scholars having succeeded to be a paramount example for the ruling class and for what I call the second kind of Chinese scholars, those who are not too much interested in ruling, but rather by poetry, by painting, by art, by the exploration of inner and outer reality. So I would like to read not from the novel, because the piece from a novel would be too long. I think it's half a chapter, but the historical conversation as it has been written down by Cheng Shao in his records of the three kingdoms between Chaos Dragon and Liu Bei. Liu Bei, surname Liu Bei, B-E-I, which is his given name, Liu Bei is a scion of the Han imperial house from an impoverished branch, who will be the king of one of the three kingdoms, the Shu Han kingdom. And he met Zhuge Liang. Well, for another thing that I want to add, there's an expression in Chinese called San Gu Mao Lu, San Gu Mao Lu, meaning three humble visits to the thatched cottage. So Liu Bei visited uh, Zhuge Liang, Chaos Dragon, for 3 times because the, the first 2 times Zhuge Liang was not present. So at, at the autumn of year 207, he went for the first time. Zhuge Liang was not home. At the end of winter 208, he went a second time and he did not meet him. And he will meet him at the third visit during spring year 2008. And it is that, well, a part of that conversation that I will read now, and which summarize perfectly the historical reality plus the philosophical and the poetic dimensions. As the Indian poet Rabindranath Tagore said, we human answer to the call of the real. And the real is combined by facts and truth. Facts is simply the whims of history, the events which happen and don't depend on us. And truth, which is precisely the first of the three eternal forms of truth, goodness, and beauty. And once again, for all of us, human history, and in this case, I'm speaking of Chinese history, but it's human history, is precisely the struggle to create the real, which is a truly advanced society and truly fair society from the legacy or from the call of truth, goodness, and beauty, from the facts that we find in the ground, if I may say so. So I would like now to start the reading, and it's not very long. That's why I chose the historical excerpt and not the excerpt from the novel. So Liu Bei said, the Han dynasty is in decline. Villainous officials usurp power while the emperor was forced into exile. I may be unworthy in both strength and virtue. You see, he stressed at once the fact of strength and virtue, but I still want to uphold justice and righteousness in the empire. However, I am not intelligent and shrewd enough, which is why I have repeatedly suffered setbacks and ended up in my current situation. Nevertheless, I have neither deviated from my initial intentions nor given up on my ambitions. Sir, what do you think I can do? Liu Bei was born in 160 and he died in 223. So in 208, he was 48 years old. And since Zhuge Liang, or Chaos Dragon, was born in 181, in 208, he was 27 years old. So Zhuge Liang, or the Chaos Dragon, replied, since Dongzhuo Dong Zhuo is a villainous official, usurper power. Many warlords throughout the empire have risen up, seized, and controlled territories. Cao Cao, the future founding father of the Wei kingdom, Cao Cao was inferior to Yuan Shao in terms of fame and military power, yet he managed to defeat Yuan Shao and transform from a weak to a powerful warlord. This was not due to only favorable circumstances, but also human intelligence and wisdom. Now, as Cao Cao leads hundreds of thousands of troops and uses the emperor's name to command other warlords, you definitely can compete with him directly. Sun Quan, another warlord, Sun Quan rules over Jiangdong. Jiangdong is the southern part of China, and his family has controlled the region for 3 generations. He has geographical advantage, the hearts of the people, and the support of many wise and talented advisors. You should attempt to make contact and form an alliance with him instead of trying to conquer his territories. As for Jing province, and Jing province is what is called the Hubei province nowadays, okay? Where is the infamous city of Wuhan. As for Jing province, it has natural geographic barriers such as the Han and Mian rivers in the north, as well as direct access to an abundance of resources from the sea in the south. It is connected to Wu and Kuaiji commanderies in the east and Ba and Shu commanderies in the west. It is a strategic location in the eyes of military strategists. If ruler doesn't have the capability to defend it, it is a special gift from heaven to you, general. Do you, general, have the intention of seeing it? Yi province is what is called Sichuan province nowadays. Yi province is a geographically strategic location. It has thousands of li of fertile land and has been called a country of heaven. Emperor Kaozu, the founding father of the Han dynasty 400 years before, Emperor Kaozu used it as his base when he started conquering the empire. Liu Chang is incompetent and weak. He also faces the threat of Jianglu in the north. Even though his domain is wealthy and prosperous, he doesn't know how to treasure all the talents there hope to serve under a wise ruler. General, you are not only a member of the imperial clan, but also a man famous throughout the empire for his integrity and righteousness. You have attracted heroes to aid you, and you seek wise and capable talents like a thirsty man looking for water. If you control Jing and Yi provinces and make use of their strategic geography to defend them well. At the same time, you should foster good relations with the wrong peoples in the West and implement policies to placate and pacify the Yi and Yue peoples in the South. Externally, you should build a strong alliance with Sun Quan. Internally, you should reform government and promote the civil culture. And what he means by civil culture is a classical culture promoting an education that will bring forth truth, goodness, and beauty. And the word civil in Chinese, one, is, I think, better translated as being refined or culture. Of course, we cannot say culture. So the translation would be refined culture or civil culture. When the opportunity arises, you can order one of your senior officers to lead troops from Jing province to attack Wangcheng and Luoyang, Luoyang being the imperial capital city at the time. Wang Yu, general, can personally lead the troops out of Yi province via the Qin Mountains. The Qin Mountains is a mountain range north of Sichuan and south of Shanxi. When you do this, won't the people welcome you and your troops with food and drink? If this really happens, you won't be able to fulfill your ambition and the Han Dynasty won't be revived. This, and that is the end of the quotation. This short quotation from the records of the Three Kingdoms by Chen Shao mention everything that is important in Chinese political science. The center of Chinese political science is that man of talents would be attracted to a man of virtue, and a man of virtue has his three layers of energy: the personality, the individuality, and most and foremost is the universal self. The universal self being that pure awareness or that eternal witness at the center of us all, and that would help us to develop in others the four cardinal virtue of wisdom, valor, moderation, and justice. Because once again, history is the core of the real, and the real is created by combining truth, goodness, and beauty with the whims of fate. And I would like to remind the first 12 lines, the first 12 words of the Three Kingdoms. And the first 12 words of the Three Kingdoms are 话说天下大事，风久必合，合久必分. Okay? So I repeat, 话说天下大事. It's translated in English as here begins our tale. But here begins our tale is not false, but it doesn't give the meaning of the 6 Chinese words. Okay? 话说天下大事. I will begin by the last words, 事. I already spoke about that 事 when I presented on the I Ching. Okay? And the Greek word for 事 is Kairos. When I said that history, human history for striving for justice, is the play between the whims of fate and the four cardinal virtue, is precisely what that name, that word "shu" means. And "shu" is a Chinese characters formed by 3 components: the hand, the ball, and force, meaning how to handle the ball or the situation, the whims of fate, with force. And that force, of course, is not brute force, but the force of wisdom, valor, humanity, and justice. So, 话说天下大事 means now we are going to have to create a myth about the Kairos of the world. Okay, I use the Greek word because Kairos, I think, is the only word that is worthy to translate "shu" as I just explained, to handle with justice, valor, humanity, and wisdom any situation given by the whims of fate. The second part, 分久必合，合久必分. Long divided, the empire will unite. Long united, the empire will divide. And those two parts of the sentence, and each part has 6 characters, is another way to express the upper trigram and the lower trigram, okay? Because precisely how to handle the Kairos with the 4 cardinal virtues, the 6 first characters is the upper trigram, okay? The epistemological journey, the journey of the soul. And the 6 last characters saying that the empire long divided must unite and long united must divide is precisely the cyclos and the chronos, okay, the whims of fate. What is happening in terms of events, of natural disasters, of invasions, etc. But when you have the upper trigram that has been developed, those whims of fate can be handled with force, or more precisely, with justice, wisdom, valor, and humanity, which is universal history. And that those cycles and those chronos and cyclos will keep on repeating till all of us, our future offspring, will develop, will go on at a significant intensity on the epistemological journey, so that the power of the 4 cardinal virtues, justice, valor, wisdom, and humanity, would be capable to deal maybe very easily with any whims that fate will present to us, rather than to be destroyed or to be uh, lower to a lesser degree of civilization. Um, I would like to go back to the chronology of the 3 kingdoms. So the Han Dynasty collapsed on November 24, 220. Cao Cao, the ancestor of the Wei Dynasty, died in March 220. In the beginning of December of 220, Cao Pi, Caopi, the son of Cao, one of the son of Cao Cao, declared himself emperor, and the Wei Dynasty was thus created. 1 year later, in 121, Liu Bei, the imperial scion of the Han Dynasty, declared himself emperor in the Sichuan province. And in 229, so 9 years after the Wei Dynasty, Sun Quan, the guy controlling the southern Chinese territory, declared himself emperor. The Wei Dynasty will conquer the part of Liu Bei in 263, and the part of Sun Quan in 280. That's why the 3 kingdoms is only a 60 years long period, 220 and 280. I would like to say also that the population in year zero in China was about 60 million people. It can be compared to the population of the Roman Empire at the same time, because in year zero, there were about 180 million to 280 million people on Earth. 1/3 was in China, 1/3 in the Roman Empire, and 1/3 in the rest of the world. 200 years later, in 220, the population of China dropped to about 40 million people because of war and famine. The three kingdoms were not equal. The Wei dynasty had control about half the territory, but can boast maybe 30 million on the 40 million of Chinese people at the time. So it was by far the most powerful kingdom. The Wu kingdom, controlled by Sun Quan, had a vast territory, but maybe around 8 million people. And the the weaker Shu Han kingdom had about 2 to 3 million population. So they were very unequal. And I would like to remind that the southern part of China was not very populated, okay? Even 4 centuries later, under the Tang dynasty ruling from 618 to 907, about 12 to 15% of the Chinese population live south of the Yangtze River, or Changjiang River, as the Chinese said, or the Yangtze Kiang, using the more popular Cantonese name. So during the Three Kingdoms period, there were about maybe 8 million people in the Wu kingdom. So so let's not forget also that in 265, the Wei dynasty has been replaced by the Jing dynasty, Jin. And that Jing dynasty, it was that Jing dynasty that would conquer the southern part of China, the Wu kingdom, in 280, and not the Wei dynasty. And the Three Kingdoms is a pivotal moment of Chinese history, because that Jing dynasty will move south and will implant more profoundly Chinese culture in the southern half of China. Okay, because the almost 10 million square kilometers of present-day China did not appear by magic in one shot. Okay, it has been created progressively during the 21 centuries of imperial China. And the heartland where the Chinese culture has been created, from the Xia dynasty to the end of the Zhou dynasty, meaning the first 2000 years of Chinese history, from 2070 BCE to the creation of the first empire in 221 BCE, that heartland was in the northern part of China. And it was only at the beginning of the second third of imperial China, under the Tang dynasty, that the second half has truly been incorporated inside the Chinese empire. So it was not something that has been done in one day, of course. The other thing that I would like to say is that the three kingdoms, of course, once again has an impact on the Chinese people, on the Chinese children, on the Chinese teenager. There are many models coming from the three kingdoms. And I was speaking of the upper trigram and the lower trigram, but I would say that the Chinese civilization in terms of political development has always been a kind of um, complex and fragile equilibrium between three forms of governance and symbolized precisely by the three kingdoms. Okay. The first form of governance is called humane authority. So humane authority is precisely the highest form possible of human governance and symbolized by the symbolized by Liu Bei, okay, that virtuous ruler. The second form is hegemony. Hegemony is symbolized by Sun Quan, the guy controlling the south part of China. And the third part is tyranny, or better than tyranny, I would say the legalist dimension. Okay, because a tyranny has a very bad connotation. It's not really tyranny, but using constraints to govern, okay, which is the philosophy of the legalist school, meaning using rewards and punishments rather than giving an education bringing forth truth, goodness, and beauty. Because those three form human authority, hegemony, and the legalist form is a political dialogue coming from the tensions between the Confucian teachings, promoting giving an education so everyone can live his life or her life under the guidance of truth, goodness, and beauty, versus using power and force to impose rewards and punishment. In the down to earth reality, both forms coexist, of course. And I would like to answer to the person who wrote the question, what uh, what relations uh, between the real created by truth and facts. Okay, the real is to be a real human being. Okay, to be a real human being is to embody, to incarnate truth, goodness, and beauty. And at the same time, the human being has an animal dimension. And for me, animal is not bad, okay? Because if you remember, the three lines of animal represent vitality, intellect, and psyche, okay? There's nothing wrong with vitality, there's nothing wrong with intellect, and there's nothing wrong with psyche. So the real is to be capable to harmonize the animal dimensions with the higher teaching of the divine dimension, the three eternal forms of truth, goodness, and beauty. And we are the only animal species having that struggle between the lower trigram, which is perfectly natural, and the upper trigram, which is also perfectly natural, but needs to be needs an effort from us to travel uh, to travel the journey of the soul or the journey of epistemological development. there are many things that can be discussed. I'm sure that from the question, I would develop many other things. I would like to have, okay, I would like to read something about I talked 2 or 3 times about the fact that between the fact that the virtuous man has the 3 layers of energy of personality, individuality, and universal self. And I apologize to my companions of the reading session of Wednesday evenings, because those things they already heard many times. But for the people who are not regular of the Wednesday night reading sessions, it could be useful. So I would like to say that on a personal level, certain masks have been given to us through our interactions with people from our birth. So let's say from the end of compulsory school attendance, 18 to 25 years old, depending if you go to college. In ancient times, Greek actors were wearing masks to embody a role and to amplify voice for their public. The Roman actors had the same mask they call persona, okay? Persona, through the sound, giving us the psychological concept of personality, the accumulation of the voices recorded in our memory and coming from the past. And when with true education, educare, to bring forth within truth, goodness, and beauty, we bring forth the divine kingdom inside us, the weft of the fabric of our life, and the weft of the fabric of the universe. Once again, truth, goodness, and beauty. This source of energy will enable the person living in the personality, the collection of mass, each one having its habits and likes and dislikes, to start the creative journey of his or her individuality. Okay, so the divine energy of the universal self will give us the strength to create our individuality from the collections of mass given to us by our families, friends, and society. And often it has been given with good intentions, okay? But good intentions is not enough. You also need wisdom, valor, humanity, and justice. And maybe I would like to end with something that could have been said at the beginning. And once again, I will speak a bit in my favorite language, French. L'histoire est un roman qui a été, un roman est de l'histoire qui aurait pu être. Meaning that history is a novel that has been, and a novel is history that could have been. And why I'm speaking of that? Because it goes to another question, okay? What is art? Okay, art for me and for many people is more real than facts. When we were speaking of to create our reality by combining facts and truth. And precisely, art is the epitome of the creation of the real by combining facts and truth. And here, it's not from me, it's from Rabindranath Tagore, born in 1861 and died in 1941. Art is the response of man's creative soul to the call of the real. In his book, The Religion of Man, the real is born from the phenomenal reality, facts, receiving the light of the divine kingdom, truth. Art is more real than facts because the artist fecundated the facts with the energy of the transcendental kingdom, truth, goodness, and beauty. the web or the fabric of the universe in close relation with the warp of our phenomenal life, also called facts. Facts boosted with truth, goodness, and beauty is the human reality to be created, of course, at each generation. Hence, art is more real than everyday life facts or scientific facts or so-called scientific facts, because for me, real science is a form of art. So there's no true separation between true art and true science. So I have many other things written down, but let's say that I stop here because I'm sure that we can have a more interactive form with the QA period. Thank you.
Thank you, Quan, for that. And for those who are not aware, the Tagore readings are still ongoing, and they happen every Wednesday evening. So if anyone wants to join in, just contact myself or Matt, and the Zoom links can be sent to you as well. So that was that was a lot of detail. And again, for people who haven't been a part of the reading sessions, I'm sure there are a lot of questions. John Place, I believe you put your name in the queue.
Yes. Thank you, Quan, for the very interesting discussion. I have two questions. One is about the personality of Cao Cao. I've watched a few Chinese, what do you call them, soap operas or historical dramas, and most of them present Cao Cao negatively. But I did come across one that showed that at least gives him gives the impression that he was an honest character, at least most of the time. How do you perceive Cao Cao? Is he a mixed bag? Is he evil? Is he good? Or is it more complicated than that?
Thank you, John, for your excellent question, because that is precisely at the center of the three modes of governance: humane authority, the legalist preaching or advices, and hegemony. Cao Cao is a very complex character, okay? And he himself declared that I don't care that the people don't understand me. Important is that I understand myself and that I save Chinese civilization. The end of the Han Dynasty was truly a period of disorder, resembling the disaster happening in China between the Opium Wars and, let's say, the arrival of Mao Zedong, or even the arrival of Sun Yat-sen. Let's be fair, because
just a moment, because this goes into my second question, so maybe you could include it in your answer. My impression is that in terms of the demographic collapse of China, the Three Kingdoms period is at the same scale as the 30 Years' War in Germany, some 200, 300 years ago, and killed off some 80 or 90% of the Chinese population. And what is the legacy? What is the legacy of this demographic collapse through the successive centuries?
Okay, I would say that precisely, Cao Cao was, for me, first, Luo Guanzhong decided to portray him as a villain because he used the schema of the upper trigram and the lower trigram by the book, if I may say so. Okay, if we try to understand Cao Cao in a more complex manner, Cao Cao was a great man. Okay, for me, he was a great man because he took China as a moment of disaster. He applied legalist principles to maintain order, and to precisely stop relatively the demographic catastrophe. Okay, because let's not forget that even in year zero, the Han Empire had 60 million people, and at the period of Cao Cao, it was 40 million people. Okay, and in those 40 million, you have 30 million in his own kingdom. So it was 30% loss, but I would say that without his energetic and a little bit tyrannical intervention, uh, the lower trigram would be in a worse shape. Okay, because it gives me the occasion to say that the animal dimension is the foundation. Even if from the animal dimension, we need to go higher to the upper trigram because it's our destiny to accomplish the harmonization between the lower trigram and the upper trigram. And for our species, it would be a disaster if we don't accomplish our destiny by going to the upper trigram. But in period of disaster, I think it's legitimate for authoritarian people like Cao Cao to use legalist principles, meaning punishments and rewards, to protect the animal dimensions. And when that animal dimensions is guaranteed, then to go higher. Even if in on period of disasters, you have people who already have their upper trigram dimensions. Okay, that's why Chinese civilization succeeded to resurrect many times during the last 4,000 years, because within Chinese civilization, they were always a pool of people who retain the upper trigram to restart, to reboot, to resurrect Chinese civilization precisely, either at the collapse of the Han Dynasty or at the collapse of the last imperial dynasty, the Qing Dynasty, followed by Sun Yat-sen, by Zhou Enlai, Mao Zedong, and etc. And by the way, I take the occasion to say that Mao Zedong, or Mao Zedong, if I make the effort to pronounce correctly, born in 1893 and died in 1976, read many times The Three Kingdoms.
Thanks.
I don't know if my answer is good enough.
Well, the second question, how has it affected the Chinese collective psyche, or how did future dynasties act given the scale of the disaster during the Three Kingdoms period? I think that's what I was trying to get at. The second question.
Okay, how they act is to give more supervision precisely, and they also, okay, from a very practical standpoint, Cao Cao accepted what I would call maybe anachronistically nomad population, a Mongol population from northwest China inside China proper, because he needed to boost up the population. So he was an open-minded man, okay? Because let's not forget, it was almost 2,000 centuries ago, and the Chinese people tend to look down on the nomad peoples as barbarians. And Cao Cao was open-minded enough to include some of them inside the Chinese empire because of the drop in population. And I give you a very down-to-earth example. And they have been perfectly assimilated, and they kept on as ordinary Chinese people in the next generations, because they have been perfectly supervised once they have been accepted within the Chinese empire proper by Cao Cao. also more supervision for agriculture, a little bit like the Roman Empire in the 4th century and the 5th century, where the German population have been accepted inside the Roman Empire proper, not only as military auxiliaries, but also as citizens, and incorporated inside the Roman empires as Roman citizens. And with military and agricultural colonies, to give you another down-to-earth examples, to go against the drop in populations. And he succeeded to maintain the population around 35, 40 millions, so it doesn't drop further.
Thanks.
No problem.
Dr. Sally, I know that you've said some very nice comments in the chat box. Did you want to share them with the group, or you might be occupied right now? Otherwise, Franz Vandenbosch or Satomi.
Oh. Sally just wrote sure, positive.
Oh, okay. Okay, Dr. Sally, go ahead and speak. Just unmute yourself then.
This is a recent technology for me, so forgive me. Yeah, just trying to relate, since my whole orientation as a Westerner is in the world of scientific inquiry, and therefore wondering in what we attempt to describe as objectivity in the West, and to my understanding of what was presented today, that what is defined as objectivity in the West is really not real. It is a subjective interpretation of what is observed, and it is rather through the dialogue and resolving of conflict, that artful interplay of differences, from which reality becomes clarified. And I just post that as my observation and interpretation of what I have listened to today.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that it's not for nothing that the I Ching is the first Confucian classics, because it gives precisely the foundation for what you just said, okay? You have the lower trigram, which is the kingdom of facts, and you have the upper trigram, which is the kingdom of truth. And what is real for our human life is not the measure facts of the lower kingdom, of the animal kingdom, but something more complex, coming the interactions between the animal kingdom and the divine kingdom. And we are quite unique in that aspect, that we answer. Sorry,
yeah,
keep on.
If I may pose one question to you. So my sense in as a physician, when I approach patients, I always attempt to extract from them in their identification of their emotional pathology. And I always define the 5 aspects that are traditional Chinese medicine or Taoist in nature. That being, very quickly, irritability, mania, anxiety, sadness and grief, or fear. Once they make that selection, I am then able to associate their real time, their linear time view of their life's path, versus their imagination concept of their path. And I try to bring them to a third aspect of time, which I like to refer to as Tao time. Each of these three times, linear time, daydreaming time, and Tao time, are all therefore managed by our choices. The Tao time being no time. The Tao time is that experience which cannot be shared. It is what every Muslim experiences when they go to Mecca, what every Jew experiences when they stand before the Wailing Wall, what every female would experience during a birthing process that no one else would ever be able to experience. And so how would you place that third aspect of time, Tao time or no time, within the construct of artful reality and linear time reality?
Yes, thank you for your comment, because it's my way to think precisely. Okay, if we use a Greek terminology, because the Greek were quite brilliant people too, they had the same thing. Okay, the Tao time precisely is a theoria. Okay, the contemplation of the pure form and the pure forms. And that contemplation of the pure forms correspond to the sixth line of the upper trigram. Okay, and that is the innermost light of pure awareness present inside of us all. That is the last layer of universal energy. Okay, that we need to go to, because that last layer of universal energy, the eternal witness or the universal self, is that field of energy that will give us strength and valor and wisdom and humanity and justice to put order in our superficial layer of personality, which is precisely the temporal dimensions. Okay, the Chronos and the Cyclos. Okay, the Cyclos of biological cycles and the Chronos of social and historical time. And when I said that the artful reality is the creation of human beings capable to unite the animal dimension and the divine dimension, is precisely what you just said, that no mind, or that Tao mind, and that Plato called the theoria, or if you prefer, episteme. Okay, for him, the Chinese call it the upper trigram, but Plato called it knowledge with a capital K, episteme. In that episteme, the highest dimension is theoria, meaning to contemplate the pure forms. And from that no time, giving us the strength, the energy to put order in what has been given in the animal kingdoms. Okay, as instructions, as mass, as social roles. And from when we are capable to put order in those masks, well, we have what is called the individuality, which is the perfect balance between the animal kingdoms and the divine kingdoms. Okay, because in Sanskrit there is a very interesting word for animal. Animal in Sanskrit is pashu, P-A-S-H-U. Pashu means the one who is bound, the one who is controlled by others. Okay, like a horse that you wouldn't control, because you need the horse to ride, for example. Well, the human being that did not reach to the divine kingdom is bound in Chronos and Cyclos because of the mass given by others. And when that person succeeded to reach to truth, goodness, and beauty by his effort and by meeting someone, giving him the way to bring forth truth, goodness, and beauty, he would precisely unbound himself and be capable to live his eternal life, meaning his individuality, rather than to be the victim of Cyclos and Chronos. It doesn't mean that the body will not get old. The body will get old. But that real life is the life of out of the marriage of earth and heaven, and not only the life of the whims of fate inside Chronos and Cyclos. Precisely, universal history is to escape the whims of fate, okay? To escape the stupid repetitions of the same mistakes, okay? On a collective level. And we need to create the real by combining the energy of the last layers with the given of the animal kingdom, personally and collectively.
Well said.
Thank you.
No problem.
And for those who would like to hear more on this, Dr. Quan did do a class, Plato and Confucius, Spiritual Brothers and Philosopher Kings Living at the Two Ends of the World Island. So again, very much a universal history lesson. And that's exactly the point, not to repeat the same mistakes generation to generation or century to century. We're at a point where we really can't continue that anyway. Franz Vandenbosch, did you want to say something? I know that you also had some thoughts in the chat. Otherwise, Satomi or Ryan, if you have any questions, or Matt.
Well, I think Quan answered most of my questions. One thing, what's epistemological development? Like, what would that be, Quan?
Okay. Epistemological development first comes from episteme. Okay, episteme is the Greek word that Plato chose for the upper trigram. Okay, and to be precise, the epistemological developments start from the bottom to the up to the top. Sorry, and I would use to answer your question, I would use Platonic vocabulary. Okay, in the animal kingdom, we have Acacia 1, 2, and Pistis, line 1, 2, and 3. Acacia means the shadows. So Eikasa. So the shadow ones is the senses perceptions, okay? Because we have a body, we have eyes, we have nose, we have a skin, we have senses perceptions coming from the universe. That's a first level of reality, okay? So the epistemological development or the journey of the soul is to travel from lower realities, phenomenal realities, to higher realities, noumenal realities, or upper trigram, according to the Chinese words. So the first level is the sense perception. We have a reality 1, if you want. Reality 2 is the intellect, or Plato called it Acacia 2, because for Plato and for all bright people, the intellect is also a kind of shadow. It helps us to put order in things by giving labels, but you know very well that putting labels on things, on people, can help us to classify or to order them, but at the same time, it can give us a false impression of knowledge, because it's not because you give a name to something or to someone that you truly know that person or that object. That's the second, that's reality 2. Reality 3 is pistis. Okay, pistis is a Greek word, P-I-S-T-I-S, is a Greek word meaning belief or conventional truth or social truth, if you want. Okay, so rather than to have the opinion of one person or two persons or 300 persons or 3,000 persons, uh, pistis is the truth, the collective truth from a society. Okay, and the more complex is that society, uh, the more interesting would be the collective truth of that society, but it's not ultimate truth. Okay, it's still conventional truth from a given society, even if that society is very complex, but that complexity is not the ultimate truth. And that the first line, 1, 2, 3 of the animal kingdom. And this, an Englishman named Thomas Hobbes, he was born in 1688 and he died, oh, sorry, he was born in 1588 and he died in 1679. I think we can call him a philosopher, not with a capital P, but a philosopher. And he wrote a big book called the Leviathan. Okay, that book is Leviathanesque too. And in that book, he wrote that he represents for me the guy at Pistis, okay, which is the top of the animal kingdom. Uh, he doesn't have truth, goodness, and beauty in him, according to my understanding. He resembles very much to the Chinese legalist philosophers, stating that the human beings, well, they are animals, so they are stronger animals, they are weaker animals. If we need to create a minimum of order in society, well, we will have to give the power to a group of strong men having the right to kill people and to impose their laws. Because if you don't have that imposed laws, well, it would be disaster and disorder, and it wouldn't be worse. So better to have a good master, a good tyrant, than to have the law of the jungle. Okay, so I want to give that example of Thomas Hobbes, once again born in 1588 and died in 1679, as being a quite good example of what is pistis. And he has been listened to by the prince of his times, because the plutocrats and the oligarchs of the time, of course, found his reasoning quite good. And now from there is a space in the Chinese hexagram, or the dividing line, according to Plato. Okay, that dividing line or that space will disappear, or the space will become a space of communication and not a space of division, when you, by true education, okay, educare, once again, to bring forth what is within, and what is within is the weft of the fabric of the universe, truth, goodness, and beauty. So when you succeed to, by a right education, to bring forth truth, goodness, and beauty in yourself and in as many people as possible, well, you go to the divine kingdom, and the divine kingdom, line 4, 5, and 6, and beauty is line 4, goodness in line 5, and truth is line 6. And Plato would call that second part episteme, hence epistemological development. And episteme, line 4 for Plato, is dianoia, and dianoia, A is called mathematical forms, and dianoia B is called true art. Why I insist on that detail? Because at dianoia A, mathematical form, you can still slip down into the animal kingdom. Okay, For example, a good example is the cybernetic movement nowadays. Okay, those people who think that we can recreate the human soul by very complex computer programs. That's the exact illustration by the trap of Dianoa 8 mathematical forms. If you don't go to Dianoa B, which is true art, because true art is truly the door that will bring you to playful exploration, to dialecticon, okay, which is the fifth line. And from the fifth line, or from the fourth line B, true art, you cannot slip down into the animal kingdom once again. When we said that we need collectively not to repeat stupid mistakes or misunderstanding from the past, it's precisely that frontier that we need to go through and to maintain collectively, personally first, and collectively after, because as long as there's not a meaningful, a significant portion of the population at Dianoa B, at true art, the whims of fate, Cyclos and Chronos, will repeat again and again and again. And now we have the means to destroy ourselves completely. So it would be not a good idea. And true art bringing to playful exploration, and from playful exploration, while we end the epistemological journey, the highest station of knowledge, with theoria, the contemplation of the pure false. I'm sorry for my long answer, but it's an important question. So I took the liberty to answer in the long form. And thanks for your question, Satomi.
Well, thank you. I'll go to the other that Matthew said you've got more elaborate things on the Rising Tide archives.
No problem. And let's not forget that for those who prefer the more poetic and religious way to speak, epistemological journey can also be said as the journey of the soul.
Yep. I agree with that. Just to let you know, Quan, you've had many thank yous for your excellent presentation for today. So
Thank
great
you.
discussion. And I think we'll leave it at that. And next Sunday will be Dr. Tenenbaum. So hope to see you all there.